Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Avorion episode 39. I'm Enigmius, and today the Serpovectem build resumes, continues, carries on, goes on and on and on, my friends. We're working on the wings today. I decided to continue on with the wings because I had enough done after the last episode that I could do basically the entire wing portion and not have to worry about whether or not it was going to line up with things that I hadn't done yet on the main hull. I did a little bit of tweaking on the edge that we did in the last episode. We did that outer edge of the wing, and there were basically two things that I did. I made a few modifications, a few slight tweaks to the trajectory of the curve that the outer edge is following. As it got towards the front of the ship, there was a relatively small section that wasn't sort of in line with what the rest of the curve was doing, and instead of sort of continuing to follow the curve in a natural sort of manner, it kind of stepped out ever so slightly, and it was just very, very noticeable to me, and it wasn't the profile that I was looking for. But I had done the profile, and then I reworked the profile, and then I reworked it again, and it still wasn't quite there, so I just decided to leave it for a little while. And then I finally got the idea, I guess you could say, how I might approach it in order to get it sorted out, which I did. So it's ever so slightly different, and it was one of those things I could have recorded and shown to you guys, but I decided we'd already spent enough time looking at it. It wasn't really necessary. It was just taking some blocks away and putting some slightly different shaped blocks back in their place. The other thing that I did is that I changed the profile of that outer edge. Not just the curve that it's following, but the curve that we had on it. If you're looking at it from the side, basically we had the original profile that defined the curve that that edge is following. And then in the last episode, if you watched it, you saw we started kind of building it out so that it was a little bit higher than it was just normally sort of one block profile height. In the process of doing that, I created sort of like a 45-degree angle that it was following as it was moving away from that profile, both above and below that original profile line. Which was, I mean, very, very subjective. A person might have been very happy with that sort of profile. They would have had no cause for concern. I wasn't fully satisfied with it. It was basically, if you were to kind of do like a cross section of it somewhere along that curve, you would find it looks kind of like a greater than symbol because of the way that the angles that we did, they were just kind of straight. I went back and I reworked the entire edge so that instead of that greater than symbol, now it's more of a sort of soft closed bracket kind of thing. It's got more of a gentle curve, more in line with what I had originally had in mind, and consequently I'm much, much happier with it. And that brings us to this point here, which is basically, you saw we just sort of filled in the majority of the surface of this wing. And now I'm just kind of going around and getting the little bits that were a little bit trickier to line up and get everything to sort of work the way that I want it to, get all the holes filled in, and then all we really have left to do is worry about the transition on that outer edge to this flat portion here that we just sort of made out of the rest of the wing. It's very, very simple and straightforward, the design. And I kind of thought about it as I was working through the process of filling it in and making it quite flat. And I decided that I could have done a little bit more in, you know, just detailing and maybe make it a little bit more three-dimensional in places. I still have the option to do that. There's really nothing that has changed. There's nothing that has happened that would prevent me from adding more detail to the surface of this wing sort of structure above or below as we move on with the build, depending on, you know, whims and personal preferences and various different ideas that we may or may not have between now and then. So, I mean, we have that option, but to get things started and to get things moving on the wings, I decided that I could also be quite happy with just this flat element, because we do have that edge that's got something kind of interesting going on, and we do have this part where the wing is connecting to the rest of the hull, where we've got all kinds of different thicknesses and slopes and angles and curves and stuff going on that kind of adds a little bit of visual interest without being, I think, overbearing. At least that's the goal. Very messy process at this point. I wish I could tell you that everything was going smoothly and everything was lining up as well as I could hope, and that was absolutely not the case. There was a certain amount of work being done in order to try and get things to follow multiple different profiles within the span of a relatively small space. And as I was working on it, and you'll probably notice this as well, you don't really get much of a chance to focus on it, but when the camera swings around to show you what's going on the inside, it's very messy. I was talking about this in the last episode and how it would be a benefit in some cases to go and clean that up, because it would free up space for important things that we might want to put inside the hull. For example, cargo storage or generators or whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that we can stick in there. But in terms of aesthetics, I didn't want to put myself in a position where I was going to have to go through this extremely tedious process of trying to get everything to look okay on the inside and at the same time be the same on one side as opposed to the other. We have the mirror mode. The mirror mode works quite well, but there's still a lot to be said for the changes that happen when you're merging blocks, and what you have on one side isn't mirrored over to the other side when you merge the blocks, and consequently when you've got blocks on one side that are merged and blocks on the other side that aren't merged, when you select the ones on either side, whatever changes you make don't necessarily also carry over to the other side because they're different blocks. And that's kind of the problem with trying to clean up such, I mean, look at this. It's just absolutely terrifying in there. But a little bit of goofing around, a little bit of messing around, some experiments, most of which were failures, but enough of which were successes that we were able to get done what I wanted to get done. The one thing that I like about this, above all else at this point, is that once we get everything finished, we get the rest of the wing filled in, we get all of the details taken care of towards the end of the build, when we come back and we just start basically selecting the entire ship and merging as much as we possibly can. This is where we're going to have those flat platforms, fairly large flat platforms to mount our turrets on, that may be slightly more robust than smaller pieces. Mentioning in the last episode, of course, if we've got the integrity field stuff going on, it kind of diminishes the benefit of having great big slabs to mount turrets on and have them last longer. But I'd rather have them and not really benefit from them than not have them and find myself in a situation later, perhaps the ship gets damaged, and the part of the ship that gets damaged is the part that has the integrity field generators, etc., etc. Suddenly, it's not such a bad thing to have these great big slabs that are all merged together with the turrets on them. I would have, at some point, made sure that the slabs that I'm placing now were the thickness of the main section of the wings, basically 3 cubes thick, if we can use that measurement. And I started kind of putting everything in place, and I realized that the way that I was setting it up, we weren't doing that. We had a piece on the top, and then we had an empty spot, and then we had another piece on the bottom because of the way the mirroring was working. And you can see that it's still basically the exact same thing that we're doing now. We've got 2 plates essentially that we're putting in place with an empty section in the middle. And I noticed that, and I started thinking to myself, like, I don't really, to be honest, I don't really want to just start pulling the whole damn thing apart so that I can put these things together the full thickness. But I remembered when I was looking at stuff, getting ready to start recording, that trinium is apparently very heavy. So it's maybe to some extent to our benefit to not have all that extra mass, for the sake of saying that we have extra mass for basically turret hardpoints that we may not even actually need once we get the integrity field generators. I kind of like these kinds of decisions. There's certain rules at play that dictate how the game is going to behave, and step one is learning what those rules are and how they apply, when they don't apply, and all these other things. And there's a learning curve, and everyone goes through it, and that's fine. But then you start getting into these little things that influence the effectiveness of these mechanics one way or the other, and making the decision, okay, well, maybe it's not so great in this circumstance, but there's also this other circumstance. And then all of a sudden, it's no longer a black and white scenario where we're talking about the absolute best or not the absolute best. We have that sort of situational sort of relevance that makes things a little bit more interesting. One of the things that I've discovered, and I should point this out, in a variety of different games where we do have a certain amount of depth and a certain amount of variability in the decisions that we can make and the justifications behind those decisions, is that quite often what comes to mind as a great decision for reason ABC actually turns out to be not such a great decision, because you get into the actual gameplay and you find out that A, B, and half of C hardly ever happen. So it was sort of like a decision that made sense at the time. There was logical basis for the decision, but it didn't go far enough to understanding the actual circumstances that you'll find yourself in based on those situations, etc., etc. So then it adds in the gameplay experience layer of thinking and considering how things sort of fit together and work together or not, which done well can add many, many hours of entertainment value to a game. And, you know, seeing it in an early access game and looking at it and saying, okay, if this was a released game, what would I say about it? Is quite often very different from what I would say about an early access game, because there's such a thing as trying to be a reasonable human being and not creating expectations that aren't reasonable. But at the same time, all of this thinking about, you know, the rules and the mechanics and how everything works and how they actually translate to the gameplay experience and the decisions that we make and the things that we learn that influence the builds that we do down the line has kind of re-sparked my interest in flying a ship around and, you know, taking part in the actual gameplay itself without any kind of, you know, in the survival side of things, if we want to call it survival. In other words, not creative, where we have to mine our own resources, we have to fight our own battles, we have to defend ourselves. If we get attacked, we can't just laugh them off and poke fun at them for not being able to hurt us, that sort of thing. So there's the other element of the game that I haven't really explored in all that much detail, because I'm the build guy. That's the thing that I usually like to do most of the time, but I'm looking forward to getting this build done so that we can fly it around and see how well it performs based on the materials that we used, the design decisions that we made, the equipment that we put in it, etc., etc., and our own gameplay, you know, making decisions about where to go and what to shoot and all that other stuff. Lots and lots of things that we can be looking forward to in terms of not just design and the appearance of the ships that we make, but also the function. And that's sort of the gist of what I'm getting at, is that the function that I'm looking at in terms of how this ship is going to perform is kind of a question mark, because I can't really say with any sort of honesty that I'm confident that I know enough about what I'm going to be encountering with this ship to be able to say that, you know, it's going to be a good ship, a bad ship, whatever. So that's something that we'll be doing a little bit more with this build as we go around. After it's done, we do the shakedown and we spend a little bit of time getting used to it. I think that this is going to be one of those builds that the ship will be at least to a certain standard where cruising around and getting into trouble or not will be pretty fun. I hope it's going to have the necessary characteristics for that to be the case. Doesn't have to be perfect, but, you know, enough in line for everything that we kind of expect from a space flight shooting guys game. That's a very technical way of describing it, I know. All of this yammering as we go around, and we're basically finishing off the finer details of these raised sections on the outer edge. The flat section is basically done. It's all filled in. All we have to do now is make that transition so that we don't have these rough sort of inside edges underneath where we're working now. We smooth them off somehow, one way or the other. And you can see we're kind of working on making it a bit of an angle, sloping in. After a little while, I realized that that wasn't really going to be... we could make it work, but it wasn't going to be easy. And I didn't really feel like the not easy solution at this point. So at some point, very soon here, you're going to see I'm going to go in and I'm basically going to take it all out and replace it with perpendicular slopes so that it's just basically like a straight wall. And then we can get it all done, fill it in quickly. See, there we go, starting to get it taken care of. Next episode, we're going to continue with the main hull area around where the wings connect. We have a little bit left to do just to sort of smooth off those transitions on the top side. And then we have the rest of the main hull area to sort of take care of. And then there's some more main structural elements, we'll call them, things that we want to do now as opposed to towards the end of the build so that they can sit for a little while and they're in place so that we can make other decisions around them. And then we'll be doing the detailing, the equipment, and the shakedown. So we're actually not making too bad progress, I don't think, in the grand scheme of things. We're up to, I think this is the 7th episode in this build series, which is not too crazy for me. I've done way longer. So this one's coming together at a fairly good pace, I think. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes in this and other series, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel and or follow me on social media. Links for social media always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.